The sun was sinking behind the jagged red cliffs when Ethan Hale guided his tired mare onto the narrow trail that twisted through the canyon like a scar carved by time itself, the kind of lonesome stretch of land where even echoes seemed hesitant to linger. And as the wind carried with it the dry whisper of sand and sage, Ethan felt that familiar prickle along the back of his neck, the sense that the land was watching him, measuring him, weighing his intentions as it had done to every man who dared ride through. Apache territory uninvited, but he had made this journey countless times as a trader and scout. Always careful, always respectful, never venturing deeper than he needed to, until that evening when a sudden streak of movement caught his eye on the trail ahead, something soft collapsing against the rocks. And without thinking of danger or consequence, he pulled the reins and dismounted, his boots crunching against gravel as he approached the figure lying half-hidden beneath a mesquite tree. And when he knelt down, he realized it was a woman, an Apache woman, young, breathing shallowly, her leg twisted unnaturally, as though she had fallen from a height or been struck while fleeing. The stories of conflict between settlers and Apache bands flared in Ethan's mind, stories of revenge, suspicion, misunderstandings that had turned men into monsters. But none of that mattered now because the woman's eyes fluttered open, and in them he saw not hatred, not fear, but pain and a silent plea that transcended every boundary drawn between their peoples. So he spoke softly, telling her he meant no harm, and though she did not answer, she did not pull away when he slid his arms beneath her and lifted her carefully, feeling the tremor of her breath against his chest as he carried her to a shaded spot and set about tending her wounds with the small leather kit he always kept in his saddlebag. Her ankle was sprained badly, and there was a gash just below her ribs that looked like it had been made by a blade rather than a fall. And as Ethan cleaned the cut, she winced but held herself with remarkable strength, watching him with fierce, dark eyes that revealed more gratitude than she could speak aloud. He offered her water, which she accepted. Then he tore a strip of cloth from his own shirt to bind her wound, all the while scanning the canyon walls for any sign that she had not been alone. For he knew that if her family or her warriors returned and found him hovering over her, things could go very wrong very quickly. Yet something within him insisted that helping her was worth whatever risk followed. And as the minutes passed slowly into early night, the sky turning violet with the first shimmer of stars, Ethan built a small fire and cooked a piece of salt pork, offering her a share which she accepted with quiet dignity, eating slowly as though each bite cost her effort. After a time she spoke a single word, Nayeli, and touched her chest gently, and Ethan understood. It was her name, so he repeated it, earning a faint, almost reluctant nod from her. And though she said nothing else, the silence between them felt less like distance and more like an unspoken agreement that fate had thrown them together for a reason neither of them yet understood. When she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Ethan kept watch beside the fire, staring into the darkness, where shadows shifted in ways that made him grip his rifle tighter. And more than once he thought he heard distant footsteps or the faint jingle of metal, carried on the wind, but no one approached. And when dawn finally crept across the horizon painting the canyon gold, Nayeli was strong enough to stand with his help, though she winced with every step, and she pointed toward the eastern ridge where smoke curled faintly into the sky, indicating her people were there. Ethan knew he should leave, let her return alone, avoid becoming entangled in tribal matters that were beyond him. Yet when she looked at him with a mixture of determination and vulnerability, and signed with her hands for him to walk with her just until she reached safety, he found himself agreeing without hesitation, guiding her carefully along the trail until they reached a clearing where 4 Apache riders appeared suddenly, silent as ghosts, surrounding them with drawn bows and cold expressions that left no doubt they believed Ethan had caused Nayeli's injuries. But before any arrow could fly, she raised her hand weakly and spoke in their tongue, her voice strained yet commanding as she explained what had happened, or at least, Ethan hoped that was what she said, for though he could not understand the words, he recognized the tone of truth in them, and after a long, tense moment, the warriors lowered their bows, though their eyes still cut through him like steel, and Nayeli touched her hand to her heart, then to his, a gesture he felt deep in his bones. Before she was carefully lifted onto one of the horses and carried toward the ridge, her gaze lingering on Ethan until the distance swallowed them all. He stood alone then, the morning sun warming his face, unaware that his life had just shifted onto a path from which there was no turning back. And he returned to his cabin at the edge of Dry Creek, feeling oddly unsettled, as though invisible eyes followed him from the moment he left that canyon. And when night fell, he locked his door, habit he rarely bothered with, and drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with the echo of Nayeli's voice and the unshakable sense that he had crossed some invisible threshold. The next morning, as the pale light filtered through the pines, Ethan opened the door to fetch water from the well and froze. His breath caught in his throat, because carved deep into the wood at eye level was a symbol, an unmistakable, deliberate mark consisting of two crossing lines enclosed in a circle, something he had seen once in an old trader's notebook and recognized instantly as a sign used only by Apache shamans, a mark that could mean gratitude, warning, protection, or danger, depending on the one who carved it. And Ethan's pulse quickened, as he realized he had no way of knowing which meaning applied to him. All he knew was this: the canyon, the encounter, Nayeli, the silent riders. None of it was finished. And whatever force had guided him to that lonely trail had now followed him home, carving its message into his door like a promise or a threat. And as he stared at it, the chill in his spine deepened into certainty that his quiet life in Dry Creek was over, that he had stepped into a story far older and far more dangerous than he could have imagined. And the real consequences of helping that injured Apache woman were only just beginning. Ethan stared at the strange mark carved into his door long enough for the morning sun to rise fully over the ridge, its light turning the symbol into something almost alive, the sharp grooves catching, glimmers of gold as though whispering a message he couldn't yet understand. And the longer he looked at it, the more certain he became that whoever carved it hadn't simply passed by. They had watched him, studied him, stood only inches from his sleeping body on the other side of that thin wooden wall, and the thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. But instead of fear, what settled in his chest was a deep, heavy curiosity. So he saddled his horse and rode into the small settlement of Dry Creek to speak with the only man who might have answers, old Reuben Malloy, the grizzled trader whose shelves were cluttered with relics, stories, and warnings from decades spent dealing with tribes across the frontier. And when Ethan sketched the symbol onto Reuben's counter, the old man's bushy brows shot up into his wrinkled forehead as he muttered, "Boy, that's the Watcher's Mark," explaining that the Apache spoke of a mysterious group known as the Spirit Watchers, a secretive order of warriors and mystics who appeared only in times of great danger, marking those who had interfered, willingly or not, in matters of sacred significance. Sometimes the mark meant protection, but other times it meant the person had been chosen to stand against a coming storm. And when Ethan recounted everything that happened on the trail, the wounded woman, the silent riders, the fresh cut on her ribs, Reuben's expression grew more grave. For a wound like that wasn't inflicted by an animal but by a hunter, the deadly trackers hired by outlaw, raiders, and mercenaries, who trafficked in stolen artifacts and captured tribespeople for profit, men who prowled the desert like wolves with no allegiance to law or humanity. Ethan left town unsettled, a weight pressing on his mind as he rode back through the valley, the air thick and strangely still, and when night fell, he lit no fire, choosing instead to sit inside with his rifle across his knees, listening to the desert shift outside like something restless was moving through it. And just past midnight he heard it, a soft, rhythmic whistle echoing from the bluffs, not the call of an animal, but a signal, a code used by hunters to communicate across distance. He crept to the window, heart pounding, scanning the darkness until a figure stepped into the moonlight, Nayeli, leaning against a boulder for support, her ankle wrapped in fresh hide, her expression both urgent and exhausted. And when Ethan opened the door, she stepped inside quickly, whispering that her people were in danger, that the hunters had tracked her to the ridge and attacked again, forcing her to flee while the others scattered into the night. And with her came 3 shadowed figures wearing carved wooden masks decorated with feathers, symbols, and dark paint that shimmered under. The moon, the spirit watchers themselves, taller and quieter than ordinary warriors, their movements fluid and deliberate, as though they belonged to the night more than to the world of men. They did not speak at first, only examined Ethan's door, touching the carved mark with reverence before one of them placed a small bundle wrapped in deerskin into Ethan's hands, and when he unwrapped it, he found a ceremonial blade etched with ancient Apache symbols, its obsidian edge glistening with sharp purpose. And Nayeli explained in a strained whisper that by helping her, he had crossed a boundary that could not be undone, that the Watchers had seen his act of honor and now considered him part of their circle, marked, bound, and protected, but also expected to stand with them as the hunters closed in. Ethan felt a strange mixture of fear and duty swell inside him as he realized he couldn't walk away anymore, not when the threat was now on his doorstep, and Nayeli's dark eyes shone with both trust and desperation, so he nodded, gripping the ceremonial blade like a vow, and as the wind howled through the canyon, carrying the distant sound of hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, approaching, the Watchers formed a silent ring around the cabin, their masked faces turned toward the horizon, ready to stand against whatever shadows rode through the night. And Ethan knew with cold certainty that the next hours would determine not only his fate but hers as well. The lonely desert, once indifferent to his existence, now pulsed with danger and destiny. And as he stepped outside into the moonlight with the Watchers at his side, he understood that this was only the beginning of a story filled with blood, honor, and ancient powers that walked unseen through the wilderness, waiting for moments like this, when a single act of kindness set an entire storm into motion. So if you're following this journey, subscribe to the channel, because the battle, the mystery, and the truth behind the Watcher's mark are only just unfolding.